Okay, well, good morning and welcome to our third and last of our three-part series on our federal legislative briefing sessions. We are having people join us right now, so we're happy that you're all with us, and we're very excited to have U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin with us this morning. Senator Baldwin was elected first in November of 12. She went from Congress to Congress, the House of Representatives to the Senate. But throughout her career, she always worked very closely with a lot of organizations, worked across party lines, and we're very happy for the support she gave us over the years and her engagement with her, not just herself, but her staff, and they've been great to work with. Senator Baldwin serves on the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, and also the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. So she's extremely busy. And, you know, Washington is lots going on, I understand, down in Washington, D.C. So for those of you listening in, we're going to have the senator do a few brief remarks about her activities, her priorities, and then we are going to open it up for questions. So please use the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen if you want to ask a question. I'll monitor those, and we will ask those questions. And I think we have about a half hour to 45 minutes. That works. If we're going too long, Senator, just raise your hand and it's off. That's fine. So with that, I will throw it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, John. And it's really great to have an opportunity to join in this federal legislative series. What I thought I'd do is say a few words each about the American Rescue Plan, which was recently signed into law by President Biden. And then brief thoughts about the American Jobs Plan, which is the major infrastructure and jobs bill that's upcoming and still has some details to add, and then throw it open for your questions. But starting with the American Rescue Plan, in my mind, I sort of look at this very robust approach as the way to get us from where we are right now, which is still in the middle of the pandemic, to the point that I hope and pray is only a few months off, where we begin to look at the pandemic in the rearview mirror. But a number of things really needed to be put in place in order for that transition to be successful, including a robust investment in vaccination, not only the distribution of vaccines, but also making sure that those allocations to states get into people's arms in a orderly and robust way. In the past few days, America has reached the point where we're vaccinating somewhere between 3.5 and 4 million people per day. I'm proud to say that Wisconsin has been really leading among states with regard to getting our allocations into people's arms very rapidly. And we seem to be leading among the states in that regard. So a lot of reason for pride. One particular piece of the American Rescue Plan that I wanted to just highlight in terms of fighting this pandemic is a provision that I championed and got into the bill relating to emerging variants or mutations of the virus. If I think about something that could really set us back, it would be a variant of the coronavirus that eludes the effectiveness of the vaccine, that also eludes the therapeutics that have been developed to treat people who come down with the coronavirus, with COVID-19. And at the point we were debating the bill, it was clear that there was not enough research going on to see which variants of the COVID-19 virus were emerging and where they were spreading, et cetera. And so we have really provided resources to scale up that surveillance because, again, we don't want to be back to step one if there's a variant that won't that eludes the vaccines and therapeutics that have been developed so rapidly to fight the pandemic. And I want to see it in the rearview mirror as much as everyone else does. The American Rescue Plan does create some new programs for small businesses in particular that continue to experience challenges despite the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL program, both of which are run through the SBA, particularly focused on the hospitality industry. There's a provision for restaurants, bars, and breweries, and additional provisions for live performance venues. Again, a lot of those small businesses were the first to have to close or operate at vastly reduced capacity. And especially with respect to live performance venues, will be among the very last to reopen fully. We had particular provisions for our veterans, especially those who live in our state-run VA veterans homes, to help step up the fight against COVID-19 in those settings. And I would also say that there are a number of additional provisions that support farmers and our food supply industry, which is so key to Wisconsin. What's ahead is the president's plan for infrastructure. So the American Jobs Plan, as he's calling it, looks towards the fact that we have deferred maintenance on so many of our surface transportation infrastructure, as well as failed to make sure that everybody, no matter what your zip code, has access to high-speed broadband. The bill proposes to make a very significant investment in our water infrastructure. That's both drinking water and wastewater, as well as our ports and waterways. And it views the term infrastructure quite broadly, which I think is very necessary, given how much deferred maintenance there really is and how previously we haven't been as resilient as our infrastructure hasn't been as resilient as we need it to be. Just take the example of the cold weather in Texas, which brought down their electrical distribution grid, as well as access to fresh water. It wasn't built in a way to withstand those extreme colds. And we know that in Wisconsin, where we've seen extreme weather events, that a lot of our roads and bridges need to be substantially upgraded in order to withstand, the rainfall events and other flooding events that we have seen. So in addition to the infrastructure investment, it is a Jobs Act, and I know that's an issue for many on this call in terms of the labor supply. And it's intended to do not only job training, but job retraining for those who've been displaced in industries that haven't made it through the pandemic. And it's a very sizable investment. I think that lessons learned from the Great Recession, where it took 7 years to fully recover. We want to see quick recovery from this pandemic. And I think this investment is exactly the proportion that's needed to make sure that happens. Lastly, I wanted to just mention two things. John referenced the committees on which I sit. With the change in majority in the Senate, I now have two subcommittee gavels. The first I wanted to raise was in the Appropriations Committee, I now chair the Agriculture, Rural Development, and Food and Drug Administration subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. And there's a lot of things that I'm looking forward to doing in that setting. Also on the Commerce Committee, I am the chair of a subcommittee that deals with oceans, coasts, climate change, and manufacturing. I know it's an interesting congregation of issues, but I'm very excited about the work that we're going to do in that subcommittee. So with that, let me open up to your questions.
Okay, well, thank you. Questions are coming in, and remind everybody to use the Q&A tab to ask those questions. I do have a couple questions, and you brought up the infrastructure bill, which I think we've all been very supportive of, more spending on infrastructure, the jobs that creates, and, we just, that's our lifeblood in terms of the economy, moving products in and out of the state of Wisconsin and through all points of the world. But looking through that bill, there's a lot of concern in there, a lot of non-infrastructure provisions. There's $400 billion for expansion of Medicare or Medicaid in there, $213 billion for housing, another $100 billion for additional funding for schools. I know you have to build a lot of stuff in there to get support, but if it's an infrastructure bill, I think sometimes we lose the intention of what we're looking for. So what are your thoughts and comments on that?
Yeah. So as I said, well, let me make 2 points on that. The first is that unlike the American Rescue Plan, where the administration handed us a fairly detailed plan, and we put it into legislative language. The American Jobs Plan is much more an outline, and it will be the Congress through its committees that will put the meat on the bones. So while you have the outline of what the president is prioritizing and looking at, I would just mention that there's a lot of details left to be put in. But you're absolutely right that housing and school infrastructure are incorporated in this measure. When we got our presentation last week via virtual presentation from members of the president's cabinet, the director of housing and urban development, or the secretary, was talking about particularly the stock of affordable housing and public housing, or that's subsidized. So many of the units are substandard and need to be brought up to code and brought up to a higher standard. And I still hear around the state, and I know it's true around the country also, that affordable housing is a barrier to getting employees for business, et cetera. And so there's an investment that is proposed in creating greater affordable housing, some of which would be subsidized for low-income working people and families. And so that's a proposal that is on the table. On schools, I think it's not designed to be operational expenses. We have a lot of schools that are decades old, if not well over 100 years old, that have a lot of deferred maintenance. We know we're frequently looking at referenda in the state of Wisconsin for taxpayers and voters to decide whether or not they're going to make an investment in the capital investment in their school infrastructures, whether that's replacing roofs that are having leaks, or just improving the the facilities themselves to meet the changing needs of a community. So again, both of those, I think, in a broad view of infrastructure, are on the table for us to look at. In addition to the things we, on a routine basis, think of as infrastructure, like roads and bridges, ports, rail, and our electrical infrastructure, our transmission and distribution.
And paying for this is always where a lot of debate comes in, and part of the Biden proposal raises corporate tax rate from 28% or up to 28% from 21%. And I understand Secretary Yellen is trying to create a global corporate minimum corporate tax. So that's getting a lot of traction in terms of dissent to that proposal. What's your thought about that?
Well, unlike the American Rescue Plan, which was handled in a way that viewed the spending as emergency spending related to the pandemic, there's a strong belief that we need to pay for the infrastructure and not just add it to the nation's deficit and debt. And so the corporate tax rate change was what President Biden proposed. It would, if implemented just the way he proposed it, it would create enough revenue over 15 years to pay for all the infrastructure that is contemplated in his plan. It is a proposal. You may have seen over the past few years that infrastructure has gone from an issue that everybody agrees on. My first few votes on transportation bills as a member of the House of Representatives were near unanimous. But that was in a time when the gas tax raised enough revenue to keep up with our infrastructure needs. As soon as that changed, we have had much more fraught political debates about maintaining and strengthening our nation's infrastructure, because there's been a failure to agree on a way to pay for that. And so I believe we can't defer maintenance and these resiliency investments forever, and that we're going to have to come together and figure out a revenue source for those investments. I certainly would look at the corporate tax rate in a little bit of a broader context. Before the tax bill of December 2017 passed, the corporate tax rate was at 35%. During that, so that would have been true in tax years 27 up to 2017. Then in 2018 tax year, it dropped to 21%. So corporations have, by and large, had the 21% effective rate for the calendar years 2019, 2020, and depending on whether something was retroactive, but 2 years. And it's not as, I understand why the administration sort of went in this direction, because it's still much lower than it was before the proposal is much lower than it was before the tax bill of 2017 passed. But it raises the necessary revenue to make the investments that I think we need. If you look at like the civil engineer's annual report card of the condition of our nation's infrastructure, we usually score less than a D plus. Other nations that are economic competitors are investing 2, 3, 4% of their GDP into their infrastructure. and we are failing on that note. So I'm hopeful that we can create the political will and a revenue source in order to push this forward. I'm open to other options, but we have to ultimately decide how we're going to do it.
Sure. Well, one of the questions that came in is, will Build America backed bonds still be a potential funding source for core infrastructure in that new bill?
That will depend on the committee consideration, but I would not be at all surprised if that remains in the bill. That will probably be decided in the Senate, in the Senate Finance Committee. I am not a member of the Senate Finance Committee, but that's probably where the action will take place in terms of deliberating on that piece.
The border has been, an issue. You see it in the news all the time. Question here is, do you believe we need to control our borders? And if so, how are we going to accomplish that? And do you think we are going to, what we're doing now is working?
I absolutely believe we have to control our borders, and believe that we need to do so through a sort of multifaceted effort, depending on the geography and topography, et cetera. So, in some places fencing is appropriate. In others, I took a tour to the border. It was a little over a year ago, and a lot of the border, I think, can be maintained through other types of surveillance and sort of smart technology. In terms of the current challenges on the southern border, what we obviously are seeing again is the sort of what tends to be an annual spring migration up. The summer months tends to be less, there's less traffic there because of the very, very harsh conditions. But in the spring, there's usually an uptick, a surge, if you will. But the disturbing part, I think, for all of us to watch is the number of unaccompanied children who come. And the big change in policy between the previous administration and this administration is saying that if this is an unaccompanied child, we are providing housing and not sending them back. But anyone who is an adult or an intact family where there's a parent and children are not being allowed in, and the processing of any claim that they're making for refugee or asylum status is processed while they're typically in Mexico. The Mexican government has changed its posture with the they're overwhelmed too. But I think that a multi-pronged approach that also deals, at least diplomatically and politically, with the governments in the Northern Triangle countries that we talk about, where most of these children come from, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, is a key point there. Because if it's not safe, we'll probably continue to see in the home countries. We'll probably continue to see people seeking asylum in our country.
Something very near and dear to us is the Oshkosh Corp contract that they received from the United States Postal Service. I think it's a $10 billion contract, which will keep us going for quite some time. But there has been a movement to review the award, being led by Democratic legislatures from Ohio and green energy supporters. So is there anything your office can do and our delegation can do so that we can retain that contract, so there's no increase in that electric vehicle component?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I am thrilled about the awarding of the contract to Oshkosh Corporation, and I have had a chance to have several conversations about what opportunities lie in store, not just for Oshkosh Corporation, but for suppliers. And there'll be many, and we hope that those many will also be Wisconsin and U.S. companies. Congressman Ryan's objection or whatever, it seems to me to be completely without merit. And what can we do? We can follow it closely and urge that it be resolved in an expedient fashion. But I think it's meritless, and I do not believe that that we will see the apple cart upset by virtue of his having raised that objection.
That's certainly good to hear. Whenever those contracts happen, there's always challenges to that, and I think part of the idea is that these shouldn't be political. These should be based on the prototype that was presented, and the U.S. Postal Service had a very thorough examination. There were several competitors that applied, and Oshkosh Corporation came through with flying colors, I might add. Oh, they're a great company. I know they've commented on your efforts with them, and very thankful for your support over the years. So that's good stuff. I usually don't do this, but I'm going to recognize the person to ask the question. Lori Palmieri is asking this question. Newly reelected mayor as of fresh off of last night's election. So congratulations, Lori. Her question is, what is the status of the Parks, Jobs, and Equity Act?
The Parks, Jobs, and Equity Act. Yeah. I'm going to have to get back. I don't, unless, is Dan on the call? Do you want to throw me a lifeline here in terms of the current status?
Well, we'll leave it up to our mayor to throw you a zinger, right? So
yeah, no. So we'll get back. Can we do it through your? Well, John, we'll just get back to you with the information. You can share it right away.
Sure, that'd be great. That'd be great. One thing we're seeing a lot, and the labor market's getting tighter and tighter again. I think there was an article in the local paper this morning about how Wisconsin is, I think 9th in the nation in terms of unemployment rates. People are going back to work. Participation rate isn't what it used to be, but now employers are starting to struggle. As a matter of fact, we're doing a drive-through job fair in a couple of weeks here again. I'm seeing restaurants primarily really struggling with that, and I was on vacation recently and had a conversation with an owner of a restaurant, and he was saying, well, there's people out there who would, who are wanting to, can work, but they got this extra boost on unemployment, and it's easier for them to stay on unemployment for the period of time. So your comments and thoughts about what can we do to get people back to work again?
Yeah, well, several. First of all, with regard to restaurants and others in the hospitality industry, again, that's been a really, it presents a unique set of circumstances that don't necessarily parallel other areas of business and industry. Because in many cases, restaurants have reopened with limited capacity. And therefore, the hiring has often been for part-time rather than full-time jobs. You can't justify the full-time jobs until the restaurant is fully reopened. And I do think that that creates a sort of unique set of circumstances of somebody saying, well, I can't afford to say yes to this if I don't have full-time hours. That's what I need. And what I hope and pray is that between the special provisions in the American Rescue Plan for restaurants, bars, and breweries, and the uptick in vaccination, where we hope that within a few months that we'll be able to see things reopen at full capacity, that those employment issues will begin to work their way through. In other industries, I also hear about workforce shortages, and there I think a combination of strategies need to be applied. I am a firm believer in sort of on-the-job training and earn while you learn, and have championed measures to allow smaller businesses that may not have had apprenticeship programs to work together in communities to try to add new apprenticeship opportunities, which I think are appealing to both workers and to employers. In addition, one of the strategies we've used in Wisconsin and elsewhere in the country for years, especially for those who've been out of the workforce for longer periods of time, is transitional jobs or subsidized jobs. And that idea is that that there's someone working with the employee on the challenges to employment, be that childcare, transportation, those sets of issues, and the employer has a partial subsidy for that worker, but over the course of 3 to 6 months, that need for the outside support should reduce. And ideally, then the employer takes on that employee who's learned from on-the-job experience as a full-time employee. So those are some of the things that we're looking at in the American Jobs Program to look at the harder to place employee, perhaps because they've been out of the workforce for some period of time.
With the Senate being divided evenly, what are your thoughts about the filibuster and doing away with the 60-vote rule?
I think that time will be a big measure of what we end up doing. If it appears that proposal after proposal after proposal is blocked, that I think that there will be an earnest debate on perhaps reforming the filibuster rather than necessarily eliminating it. Right now, a lot of the discussion has centered around something called a talking filibuster. Most people, I think, believe that a filibuster does involve somebody taking to the floor and speaking at great length, followed by somebody else, and publicly stating objections to a measure, and that being what a filibuster is. But and it used to be that way in the 60s and 70s. It was also very rarely used. But these days, you can phone it in. Basically, you can literally call the Republican cloakroom or the Democratic cloakroom and say, I have an objection to this bill, and it's just never brought forward. And if that, I think that because there's a real interest in getting some major things done in the next few years, we will be forced into a reckoning with the filibuster. My guess, since there's not even unanimous support in the Democratic caucus for eliminating it, my sense is that we'll probably be looking more at a potential modification like the talking filibuster. And I think Dan just posted something. Dan McCarthy is my legislative director, by the way. I think he might have just posted something about the parks bill that was referenced earlier.
All right. Just remind everybody, we're nearing the end of our segment here. So if there's any last questions, please get them in. One came through here. Have there been ideas, or I understand there's ideas floated to tax big tech? No, hang on a second. Big tech more due to their negative impacts on jobs. Is this still on the table? And some examples are driverless semi trucks, Amazon impact on Main Street businesses.
I have not I have not tracked any particular tax provisions that would impact those sectors. On the contrary, on driverless vehicles, autonomous vehicles, there has been last session an attempt to get bipartisan legislation creating some ground rules, if you will, for a deployment of this technology on our highways, and making sure that there's not a patchwork of local and state ground rules. And so I think there's been more of an endeavor to unleash the potential of these discoveries than these innovations rather than halt them. But I do think that with regard to the online purchasing versus brick and mortar, that there's been greater sales tax collection than there used to be. So one of the things that really put brick and mortar retail at a disadvantage was you could go, go in the showroom, find out what you want, and then try to find it at a lower price online and elude the sales taxes. Pretty much now, I'm seeing the sales taxes actually applied and sent. So that's beginning to work itself out on its own. I'll tell you just as an aside, having recently done my taxes, Wisconsin, they basically ask, have you purchased anything by catalog, by phone, on the internet on which you haven't paid your state and local sales tax? And so I go through all my receipts and find that most of them actually do charge the sales tax, even if I bought something online from another state. I like to, by the way, patronize Wisconsin businesses when I can, but every so often there's something that I'm buying from out of state, and I've noticed a real significant change in the application of state and local sales taxes in recent years.
I'm not sure if people who are listening can see Dan's post, but I'll read it. The Parks, Jobs, and Equity Act was recently introduced to the House. It is bipartisan, but has not yet moved forward. It's referred to the House Natural Resources Committee, where it waits further action. So Lori, there's some movement there. And if Dan has anything else to share, you can just forward it on to me, and I can move it on to the mayor. One last question that came in here, and talking about jobs and creating jobs and the importance of that. And if that's the case, why are we allowing the border to be so wide open so that more of our jobs are taken by, in some cases, illegal immigrants?
So I'll repeat what I was saying earlier, is that current policy is that people are turned away if they are an adult or an adult with children. They are not brought into the U.S. If they are an unaccompanied child, and this is the big change between administrations, is that the unaccompanied minors are not being turned away, but they are also not, as minors, becoming part of the U.S. workforce. There are, in Wisconsin, a number of visa programs for workers, particularly in our agricultural sector. And there are right now legislative proposals to extend and reauthorize a number of those programs. I will say that one of the concerns that we've seen over the years in a state like Wisconsin is that most of the agricultural visas for immigrant workers are seasonal because they were designed around crops and planting in the spring and harvesting in the fall. But everybody from Wisconsin knows that cows need to be milked 2-3 times a day, every day. And so those agricultural visas have not necessarily met the needs of our dairy industry. I do support reforms in that area so that we can keep on managing through visas the immigrant workforce.
Yeah, well, great. Well, Senator, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. You've been great to work with. We appreciate that work. Give a shout out to Jennifer Gardner. Jennifer
Yes,
is
indeed.
a local representative here. She's helps us tremendously on a lot of issues, and she's always been very responsive to that and engagement there. So to remind everybody, we have recorded this session. It'll be on our website probably sometime late this morning or early afternoon. So be looking for that. We'll be pushing that out. So with that, again, thank you very much, Senator Baldwin, for joining us, and keep up the good work. See you soon.
Well, thank you so much.